Hi, everyone. Welcome to this exciting webinar that we have going for you today with Dean Stanberry. We're very lucky to have him because he is the IFMA Chairman and Board of Director for IFMA. We also had him on our podcast earlier this year. OpenWorks has a podcast called The Clean Slate. Follow us so you can get it, listen to it wherever podcasts you listen to, Spotify or Apple. But we're very excited to have him here. A little bit about OpenWorks just very quickly, and then we'll jump into the webinar with Dean. OpenWorks is a facilities management company. We're over 40 years old, which is pretty interesting for a facility management company, and we are concentrated on commercial cleaning for large facilities. So we are just working really hard to expand our knowledge and share our knowledge with everybody who is in the facilities management sector. And part of that is ESG, which is a really big initiative and has been. But IFMA is making it larger. So here to talk about the importance of decarbonizing the built environment, which we are all stewards of as facility managers, is Dean. Take it away, Dean.
Thanks, Trista, and thanks for the invitation to speak today. It's something that IFMA has a great interest in. There's a lot going on in this industry. But just to start off a little bit, let me go ahead and share a little bit about myself. So I am IFMA's chairman of the Global Board of Directors. It's a volunteer role. I've been involved in facilities for over 20 years. But I actually started out in IT. I had about 22 years in IT running large-scale mainframe data centers before taking a right turn into facilities and real estate. And that technology background has served me pretty well, especially in these past few years as we move into this digital transformation of the entire commercial real estate industry. So coming into this presentation today, I was given just a few topics really to kind of touch on. And so that's what we're going to do. So let me get into the presentation here. So, what is decarbonization and sustainability? Since the early 2000s, sustainability has been the general term referring to a more conscious use of natural resources relative to the design, construction, and operation of the built environment. Fast forward to the 2020s, and we're witness to a more frequent effects of climate change and related climate risks. We all know that climate change is primarily attributed to increasing levels of atmospheric CO2 or carbon. And decarbonization appears to have overtaken sustainability as the contemporary terminology describing efforts to minimize or eliminate human-caused carbon emissions or attempts to remove atmospheric carbon and reduce CO2 levels. With respect to the built environment, decarbonization seeks to reduce embodied carbon emissions, which is mostly in design and construction processes, and the operational carbon throughout the building's operational life. In this diagram, which may be a little bit difficult to see, but it tries to show those stages. Embodied carbon really refers to things on when you build a product, whether it's a building or some of the pieces that go into the building. All of that resource that goes into that is considered embodied carbon, up to the point that it gets delivered to that loading dock, and now you install it for use, and then you start tracking its operational carbon. How much energy does it use over its life? And when you look at a commercial building, as I put in the slide here, operational carbon really accounts for 80 to 85% of a building's life cycle carbon. Even though the slice is a little small here, the diagram is kind of showing all of those design and construction processes and then the decommissioning at end of life. But the largest chunk of carbon emissions is really within the building's operation. And so if you're part of that operation, such as cleaning or facility management and operations, then you're part of helping decarbonize the built environment. So how do we measure carbon? There's lots of things that produce carbon, so therefore there's lots of things that we have to measure. And how do we do it consistently so that when we're reporting on these things that we're either not missing things or we're not double counting things? The UN has a program where we talk about scopes 1, 2, and 3 of emissions. Scope 1 refers to carbon emissions that happen on site. You generate your own energy. You have a generator or something like that, and it burns fuel, and therefore you're producing on-site carbon emissions. This would also apply to agriculture and a bunch of other industries. Scope 2 refers to the emissions that occur when you're using energy from the grid. You're using the energy produced by a generating plant, whether it's coal-fired, natural gas, or renewable energy. And then scope 3 is basically everything else. And that is the one that is very difficult at this point to track with a degree of accuracy and completeness, because not every product that we acquire can we determine what its embodied carbon is. So for example, if you buy a piece of equipment, do we have anything from the manufacturer that tells us how much carbon went into producing that product? One example that we can see in construction today is concrete. Many concrete suppliers, the raw material, have what's called an environmental product declaration that can tell you how much per yard of concrete the embodied carbon is. Concrete is actually one of the largest contributors to embodied carbon. In fact, if concrete were its own country, it would be the 6th largest emitter of carbon on the planet. So think about that for a little bit. As we move more towards a circular economy principles, we need to start thinking about how do we track these things going forward. Not a lot of this is really settled yet. When you think about a building, the design and construction might last for 18 to 36 months. Operations might last for 75 to 100 years. And even during operations, buildings go through renovation. So again, you're incurring more embodied carbon as you renovate parts of a building. So there's a lot to it, and I don't think we quite yet know how we're going to track it over the life of a 100-year life of a building. But it's something we need to start with. Do you know where you can find your these metrics, the energy, the water, the waste? Do you track that today? Do you think that data is trustworthy? Do you have a good baseline? And that's what people should be thinking about today, is just getting those things in place so that when we have better mechanisms to track this at a more holistic and global level, that we will be able to do so. So the goal is to have a complete and accurate measurement baseline, and then you can start moving forward from there. So let's talk about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Despite the level of attention focused on ESG, to the best of my knowledge, there are no formal or generally accepted standards for ESG that exist yet. There's a number of reporting frameworks that make up parts of ESG reporting, such as GRESB or GRESB, TCFD or SASB, and these are primarily financially focused frameworks. And I personally believe ESG is an evolutionary step in corporate accountability, emphasizing the auditability of reporting data. ESG's predecessor, which was called Corporate Social Responsibility, or CSR, was primarily considered greenwashing, as many of the CSR reporting claims could not be proven, or the assumptions and basis of reporting were questionable at best. And ESG is attempting to correct that by making it more auditable and more accurate for that reporting data. Currently, ESG is mostly adopted by the investment community, real estate investment trust, because they want to know whether a company that they're doing business with and the properties that they are acquiring, whether the information regarding those properties is trustworthy. Now, as you look at this eye chart here, and the slides are going to be available, so you'll be able to look at this in a little more detail. You'll see that there's a number of components within ESG. We have disclosure standards, we have sustainability frameworks, we have aggregators and scorecards, we have credit rating agencies, corporate rating agencies, some specialty data providers, fund rating agencies, and the list goes on. And these are just categories of information providers or standards on how we collect and track this data. So ESG is probably going to be a little unsettled for a while, but you can bet that people will start asking you for ESG related data. And the question is will you have that data available, and will it be trustworthy? Because again, they're asking that it be auditable. Can they come back and prove that the data that was provided was trustworthy when it was provided? Even the Securities and Exchange Commission is issuing guidance on ESG reporting. Now, that primarily applies to publicly traded companies. So a lot of companies that are privately held are saying, whew, we don't have to worry about that, I guess, because we're not publicly traded. Guess again, because if you do business with these publicly traded companies, they're probably not going to let you get away with reporting anything less than they're required to report on. So those same guidance and standards that are being applied to the publicly traded companies will probably be imposed on privately held companies as well if you're doing business with any of these folks. So I think it's a fairly small circle in a Venn diagram or intersection of companies that will not be required to report at some level at some point in time. So it's probably good to start building your awareness of ESG and start understanding what do you think you will need to report in terms of energy, waste, water, any of the social aspects, which has to do with equity, pay, equality, those kinds of things. And then governance is how is the organization governed? And that starts at the top, but it also flows down through the organization. So even for a cleaning company or cleaning service provider, the governance is, do we have standards that we apply to our cleaning, and can we prove that we're meeting those standards? So that's an example of a governance activity. Okay. Sustainability strategies. What are, I suspect that there are a few companies out there who haven't already picked all the low-hanging fruit when it comes to sustainability. Many companies lease their facilities, so they may not have many options within their lease space. They can work with a landlord to see what sustainability options they are pursuing, but if the sustainability requirements are not written into the lease, they really don't have much leverage there. But if a company owns their property, there's considerably more options open to them. Once you've exhausted all of the simple items such as LED lighting or improving basic building controls, it does require more design and engineering analysis to plan a course of action. For example, sealing up the building envelope and to upgrade to more efficient windows can change the heating and cooling needs of a building. You might not need the capacity of the heating and cooling systems that you have if the building is tighter and does not allow energy to escape. Or the planning for electrifying the building. That system may require upgrades to the building's electrical capacities. It may require the utility to upgrade their transformers and distribution network to that building if everybody starts doing electrification. So there's a lot of things that are coming down the road that are maybe not quite ready yet, but there's also a lot of things that are certainly doable today. ASHRAE, which is the HRAE. ASHRAE is a professional association that does a lot of the standards for mechanical systems. They also produce something called an ASHRAE Level 1 or Level 2 audit, which is a formal mechanism for an engineer to go through and determine how well is a building meeting its original design intent. Does it live up to how it was originally designed? And so there may be things you can do even within an existing building to just make some corrections to things that have drifted out of place over time and improve your energy efficiency while you're looking at what are the things that we can do to renovate and do some larger scale efforts to further reduce energy efficiencies. You know, some projects will be planned in stages because it may take many years to fund and complete. As more cities implement performance regulations, in New York City, Local Law 97, many are familiar with that. My own hometown of Denver has implemented building performance requirements mandates this year. They started with building benchmarking requirements in 2016, but it was always done, even at that point, with the intent that we were moving to performance requirements down the road. And that has arrived today. So there will be targets using the energy use intensity or EUI metric for buildings based on their size and other factors of where they expect their EUI to achieve over the next few years. And then once that is reached, new targets will be set. So right now we see this happening in many cities, even though there's only a few of them that have actually executed mandates. There's many, many more that are in progress. So early analysis and planning will be vital to understand what it's going to take to meet those performance targets and start planning and make sure that you have opportunities to take advantage of what's available when it gets here. I'm going to talk about funding because one of the things that comes up is how do we pay for all of this? I have some resources at the end of the presentation here. This is just a simple little example that I found that shows how incentives may be different across different geographies and where their tax credits come in. PV is photovoltaic, which is solar systems. And SHW stands for solar hot water. So basically thermal, geothermal, or solar systems to produce hot water. So the first example shows in San Diego, there's a cost of $15,000 for 2 kilowatts of solar. There's a federal tax credit, and then there's a maximum rebate. There's shows the out-of-pocket cost and the percentage of that cost that can be reclaimed. For building permits, in this case, there's no charge, there's no sale. It's non-exempt from sales tax, but it's exempt from property tax. So you can see each municipality has some different options available. So there's not just a one size fits all. You need to do some research. And again, I'll show some resources towards the end that will explain that a little better. One of the things that we've also been hit with is hybrid work. You know, FMs will need to know more, become more skilled about workplace wellness and well-being principles. And has your organization adopted a hybrid workplace strategy? As you can see from the diagram here, these are just a few that are discussed, fully distributed, default digital, a static hybrid model. While hybrid work means there may be fewer people in the office on a given day, responsibility for the experience of those individuals while they're in the office falls more and more to the facility management and operations. And from a back of house and operations and maintenance perspective, not much changes as corrective and scheduled maintenance still occurs whether the building is fully occupied or not. From a cleaning's perspective, the building may not have many occupants in it, but those occupants are still generating trash. There's still a need then to do some level of cleaning, so it does not go away. This, I think, will play out over the course of time, whether or not we see a full return to office. There's many options that we have these days. And while people are concerned about it, the biggest areas are seeing impact are in major metropolitan central business districts. And while it does impact them because there's collateral damage for fewer occupants in these buildings, means that a lot of the businesses, the restaurants and other supporting businesses in those central business districts may not have enough business to survive, to sustain their business going forward. But now they're looking at options to maybe transition some of those properties into residential or other purposes. Remains to be seen how much of that will happen. But it's being discussed. We know that there's a lot of challenges right now with empty office space. Some buildings now their value being reduced because of the vacancies. There's building owners that have mortgages that are coming due, and there's high interest rates, so refinancing is not practical. But I have faith that the institutional lenders and these building owners are going to get together, because banks really don't want these properties back. They don't want to be building owners. They don't want to be property managers. They're incentivized to figure out how to solve this problem. So I'm confident that the parties involved, the people that basically play monopoly with real buildings, will figure this out. Because again, they don't want the buildings back, and the people that own and operate them today really don't want to give them up or lose their investment. So strategies will emerge. Let's talk about future proofing. Now, with all the media attention given to smart buildings, what exactly makes a building smart? Honestly, I've not really seen a generally accepted definition of a smart building, but there's many versions that exist. Now on the side here, I've got this. I actually went to Chat GPT and I asked for the key characteristics of a smart building, and it came up with the following definition. A smart building leverages integrated technology and automation systems to enhance the efficiency, comfort, and safety of its occupants and operations. Key characteristics include energy management systems that optimize HVAC and lighting usage, advanced security systems, including access control and surveillance, integrated communication networks, automated facility management tools to predict and address maintenance needs, environmental monitoring such as air quality, temperature sensors, and adaptability to user preferences and feedback. Additionally, these buildings often use data analytics and machine learning to refine their operation and enhance the occupant's experience. That's a pretty good definition, but it's also a mouthful. But if you look at the diagram, what you see there is a lot of things that either did not exist a decade ago or were certainly not as common or as sophisticated as they are today. Buildings are becoming a very complex set of mechanisms, controls, and sensors to determine what's going on and what can we do about it. New technologies are evolving, software systems called fault detection and diagnostics, that's able to take information from pieces of equipment using weather data and other sensors to determine whether or not there is a problem or just need to make an adjustment. There's not as many people in the building today. I need to adjust my temperature controls accordingly, just because we don't need to have the air or the heat on as much as we normally would. So that's the future we face. And this definition encompasses many of the features that I would have incorporated in a smart building infrastructure. But not all buildings are purposed for occupants. They still may require smart features. We have manufacturing, warehousing, logistics. These are increasingly automated, requiring fewer people, but may be optimized for their primary purpose rather than for human occupants. Again, smart technologies are what's driving all of that. Architects, engineers, and contractors must design and construct new buildings incorporating these advanced infrastructure features. But smart building technologies will continue to evolve, and we know they will require communications as many of the existing sensor types deliver new features and functionality that we haven't even envisioned yet. FMs will need to continue expanding their skills and knowledge in these areas to reap the benefits of smart buildings. One of the challenges with commercial real estate today is it's one of the last industries to go digital. I kind of slept through about the first 30 years of digital transformation and woke up about 5 years ago. One of the problems then is that across the board, there's a very low level of technology skills and experience based on this tsunami of technology that we're throwing at people that really don't have a good idea what to do with it and how to use it in practice. The software technology, in my mind, is somewhat irrelevant. I call it a digital tin can where you store data, because data is where the real value is. Data is the new currency, and data analytics is how you unlock that value. So those are some of the skills that people need to be thinking about. If you don't understand or have any experience with data and data analytics, it's a good time to start learning, because more and more commercial real estate is a digitally driven industry, and it's only going to become more so. And so without those skills, you rapidly become irrelevant. And if you're a company that's not adopting digital transformation, again, you're likely to become irrelevant sooner rather than later. One of the last things to talk about is preparing for grid efficient buildings. So contemporary utility grids are predominantly a one-way service delivery. We produce energy, we transmit it across wires, and we distribute it to a building, and it gets consumed by devices. What we call the grid has been designed and built to generate energy, transmit it over long distances, and distribute it to the endpoints of use. In the future, we will be less dependent on utilities for energy generation and look more to them for transmission and distribution capabilities as renewable energy becomes more predominant. With the expansion of renewable energy, energy storage, and microgrids, energy will become more transactional as more endpoints will both consume and generate energy. Excess energy can be made available to others to consume, but how will these economic transactions be conducted? There's been some large-scale pilot projects testing capabilities to broker transactions between producers and consumers of energy, and which will bypass the utility providers altogether. So these are things that are coming our way. Again, we're used to only just buying energy and paying the bill at the end of the month. But what happens when you become more of a provider and also need to keep track of those transactions? There may be a fee from the utility to be connected to the grid and utilize their transmission and distribution services, but energy may be bought and sold between two parties independent of the transmission method. And what does that mean for the FM? Again, you need to develop skills and experience with these new energy management methodologies and perhaps the accounting transactions that accompany them. It's not really clear when the new energy delivery methods will emerge, but it's captured the attention of the U.S. Department of Energy and all of the large energy producers and consumers. So we'll likely see the first transition to this new energy market, very soon, within this decade. Now, moving on, incentive rebates and funding. One of the questions that most people have, in fact, almost all energy efficiency projects, initiatives, it all starts with money. Where does the funding come from? Some corporations have it in their plan, other ones not so much, because they prefer to spend their capital investments on revenue generating items and not just their building infrastructure. So on this slide, I provided a few options to go out and find out what incentives, rebates, and funding opportunities are available. The first one discusses like the city, your city's Office of Economic Development or a similar title. They may have funding sources or can point you to other departments within the city that do. If your city has a sustainability or building performance benchmarking initiative, they've probably lined up funding sources in order for people to meet their benchmarking and performance initiatives. You can do the same at the state level, but there's usually separate funding sources available. There's actually a database called Desire, DSIRE. I've got the link here, but you can also just look it up, search for it. And it's a database of state incentives for renewable energy and energy efficiency. You can check with your utility provider. Many of them have funding programs called on-bill financing, where you can actually perform some energy efficiency upgrades that the utility will pay for, and then you pay it back through your utility bill over time. And last but not last, but Department of Energy's Better Buildings Initiative division has an entire website on carbon financing. There's many good resources there. And then last but not least is there's something called PACE, which is Property Assessed Clean Energy. There's a website called pacenation.org. Not every state has approved PACE financing options. Essentially, what it means is that you have access to money that is then paid back through your property taxes. So the financing actually goes with the building and not with the owner. So if an owner sells the building, those upgrades go along with that building to the next owner and are again repaid through property taxes. There's no requirement to repay them before selling the building. But in most cases, the energy efficiency upgrades they've funded through these PACE loans generate additional value in the building. So they pay back more than it costs to repay the loan. And last, I want to include some information from IFMA. So IFMA's research, there's 3 papers that we produced in the last year. One on leading digital transformation in the facility management industry. The next one is called The Convergence. It's managing digital risk. So this is all about cybersecurity. So IT, which is information technology, now has an intersection with OT, which is operations technology. So many people seem to believe that the IT organization is responsible for all cyber risk. That's not true in this case. They're responsible for, the servers, the networks that they put up for the corporation, but it's the operation side of the business that's responsible for their operations technology, things that are connected to the physical building. So you need to work with your IT group, but understand what are the responsibilities of OT or FM and what are the responsibilities of IT. There's also a good paper that the Department of Energy put out. It's a national roadmap on grid interactive efficient buildings. That's free for download. And last but not least, IFMA offers several certifications. The Facility Management Professional, or FMP, is an entry level. Then we offer our Sustainability Facility Professional certification, the SFP, and I put a link in that here. It teaches you how to operate buildings sustainably. And last but not least, there's the CFM, which is Certified Facility Manager. And that is that's sort of the pinnacle. That's someone who has years of experience and considered a subject matter expert when it comes to facility management. I personally hold the SFP and the CFM credentials, as well as a lead AP in operations and maintenance and a whole bunch of other relevant certifications that help me with have helped me throughout my day job. So that kind of wraps up the material that I prepared. So I think we want to get into the Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing here for the moment and see if we have any questions.
Drop your questions in the chat and we will get those answered. In the meantime, I have some questions. What are your thoughts on composting? So we've done two recent podcasts with some folks, and they brought up composting as a way to hit those ESG goals. Can you talk a little bit about what you think about composting and how people can get into that?
Well, in another session that I've done, when I talk about decarbonization, I said it's not one or two major initiatives, it's thousands, tens of thousands of initiatives. And composting is one of those things that contributes to it. So rather than putting things into a landfill, we're taking some of those materials and try to put them back into use in a different way, maybe a different life than it originally had. That's actually part of the circular economy principle. So once you've mined a resource, don't continue mining it. At the end of its initial product life, can you repurpose it? Can you put it to another use? And that effectively is composting. Some companies are going to have more of an opportunity to do that than others. A large commercial high-rise building may have some opportunities to collect composting material, but more than likely they're looking for someone to come and to take it off site and then do something useful with it after the fact. Certainly manufacturing and agriculture have much greater opportunities to apply composting principles just by nature of what they do and how they do it. So yes, I think composting is a strategy. It's one of many, and I think you have to look at what is the purpose of your business? Where are you operating? Does it make sense for this particular site or for this particular business to invest in composting? And the answer may be yes or no. But if the answer appears to be yes, then yes, add it to your collection of energy efficiency and decarbonization strategies, because again, it's one of the many thousands that we must have in place.
Great answer. Thank you for that. I think there's one more that came in. What are your top maybe three things? You said we've already hit like the low hanging fruit as a facility management um, arena, but what are the top three things that you would hit if you're completely overwhelmed?
In terms of, I'm going to assume that we're talking about decarbonization.
Decarbonization,
Yeah.
yes.
Um, well, let's talk about existing buildings. LEED and other rating systems out there are doing a pretty good job. So new buildings are constructed more efficient than they were before. Doesn't mean we're done, because we still have to operate them efficiently once they built it. But for an existing building, depending on its age and what type of systems that are in there, you do have to take that more holistic approach. You have to do some assessments. You have to look at things like how well is the building envelope? Is it sealed? Do we have single pane windows that allow a lot of heat to escape, or solar gain? You have sunshine shining through a bunch of glass that's just heating up a space, and therefore you need more air conditioning. Is the roof in good condition? Do we have leaks, or is there air escaping there? Those just make sure that the building can retain, either the cooling or the heating that you spend on the inside. That's probably a good place to start, because replacing a major mechanical system, the entire air handling system, doesn't really do you a lot of good if all of that air is escaping, if you're letting it get out into the atmosphere. So you're still spending more energy than necessary. Even though it may be more efficient, you're still expending more than necessary in its day-to-day use. Things like pursuing strategic electrification, something to start looking at. If you have a gas-fired boiler in your building, hot water heaters or other such things, at some point you may be looking at having to replace those with electric versions. But does your building have the capacity? Does your switchgear have the additional capacity? I ran into this in my own house. I'm looking at getting a second electric car, and I have filled up the capacity in the electric panel for our house. So now I have to figure out how I'm going to add some more capacity to put a big enough breaker in to feed another electric charger for the house. Buildings are kind of the same way. But even if you have capacity in the building, you have to talk to the public utility and say, do you have the capacity to deliver the energy? What transformer is your building connected to, and what are your neighbors around you doing? Because maybe they beat you to the electrification and they consumed all the excess available energy, and now you're the one that says, we don't have enough to give you to meet your new demand. So there's a lot of things, as I mentioned, as we upgrade the utility grid. It's not just looking at renewable sources of energy, but it's the actual capacity of that transmission and distribution infrastructure to say, can I give you everything that you need for your particular building and all of the buildings that surround you on that particular loop? Um, and then there's just there's a lot of other things that you can do. Occupant engagement strategies. Building occupants still are large producers of carbon. We're all humans, we breathe, so we actually emit CO2, right? Not telling people to stop breathing, but are you a part of the solution within the building? Are you reducing the amount of paper that you use? Are you not consuming more energy than necessary, like turning off monitors and computers when not in use? If you don't have lighting sensors that control this stuff, when you leave a conference room, did you turn off the lights? It's amazing how much energy those things consume and how much you can reduce by just being a little more thoughtful about how you conduct yourself throughout the day. Now, most people, that's not their day job, right? They're doing something else in order to make money for their company, but it does require people to just think a little bit more. Even in your own personal life, when you walk out of a room, do you turn off the light or not? Many people do, but they don't think about it when they're at work. So we need to practice these solutions in both our personal and our professional lives. Because it's not just decarbonizing the built environment, it's decarbonizing the residential environment as well. It's not as big of an emitter, but it's still a fairly significant source of carbon emissions.
And on that, I think that's a really great note to end on. We did have one more question, but we'll ask you that offline, Dean,
Okay.
to respect everybody's time here, and we'll send out the answer in our follow-up. Thank you so much for this unbelievably important webinar on ESG and everything that we're kind of focused on. And we thank you so much for your time. And we will send a follow-up and a recording out to everybody who registered and was on this. Uh, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you again, and I
Thank you.
appreciate the opportunity to share what I know.
Yep. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.